I want to begin, as you might expect, with a few other thank yous. Thank you, first of all, to all of you for coming. I really, really appreciate it. I don't take it lightly. It's wonderful to see you. Thank you. There are many, many friends and colleagues at this university and other institutions who have helped me and supported me over the years. Far, far too numerous to mention. I think and I hope they know who they are. Some of them, a good number of them, many of them are in this room, and it's wonderful to have them here. I must say special thanks to my colleagues in the Department of English Literature, the wider School of Literatures, Languages and Cultures. I'm grateful every day for the way that they provide a genuinely friendly, supportive, collegial environment, and that has been so crucial to my career in the nearly decade and a half I've been at Edinburgh. I must just mention a couple of people specifically. They've already been mentioned by Alex, but I think it's important to flag them again. I'm so pleased and grateful that my long-time collaborators, Peter Knight and Nicky Marsh, have been able to make it all the way from Manchester and the South Coast, respectively, so they've really put in the miles to be here. You're going to see their names come up more than once more in this talk, which perhaps explains why they deserve a special mention. And their friendship, their collegiality, their collaboration has just been such a blessing in my career. It really has. It's just been such a special part of the past, again, as I say, decade and a half. So thank you both very much for being here. It really means the world to me. And finally, and I think most crucially of all, I'm so happy that my parents, Bernie and Dave, my parents-in-law, Les and Judith, my wife Mel, and our daughters Poppy and Violet are here this evening. Words can't really express what their love, their kindness, their support means to me, has meant to me. All I can really say is thank you all so much. I know Poppy and Violet are also happy to be here because they've managed to wangle an afternoon off school. So well done, girls. They're going to enjoy the talk regardless, I think, for that reason. Let me turn then to the subject of this lecture. And the basic aims of the lecture are, I think, quite straightforward. And they reflect the work that I've been doing for the past decade and a half or so. Put most simply, what I want to discuss in the next 40 minutes or so is how approaches in the humanities can make valuable contributions to an understanding of economics and the economy. So I'm going to be talking about the interdisciplinary field that's increasingly referred to as the economic humanities, a field that brings the methodological approaches of literary studies and the wider humanities to bear on topics such as money, finance, markets, investment, speculation, and economic modelling. And you can, I think, hopefully begin to get a sense of the nature and the scale, the scope of this field, just by glancing at the titles in the series that I co-edit with Peter Knight and Nicky Marsh for Palgrave Macmillan, which is entitled Studies in Literature, Culture and Economics. And you can also see here the volume that Alex kindly mentioned, the Cambridge Companion to Literature and Economics, that the three of us co-edited. As you can hopefully see, the books in this series cover film and the arts more widely, as well as literature, and they range historically from the early modern period to the present. And although this might be slightly less obvious from their titles, what they all have in common, I think, is an aim not just of analysing literary and cultural artefacts through an economic lens, although they all do that in fascinating ways, but also of using the techniques of literary and cultural analysis to explore economic theories and practices themselves. And it's very much worth emphasising that our series represents just a small portion of this much larger field. Here you can see some important defining works in the wider field, some of which written some which are written by people in this room, I'm pleased to say. But even this gallery itself is very far from being a comprehensive image of the kind of work, important work that's been produced in this field just over the past 10 or 15 years. This is leaving out kind of foundational work from decades gone by. So what I want to do in this talk is highlight several strands of theoretical thinking and research that run through this field, offering, as a kind of illustration, some examples from my own work, both individual and collaborative, as instances of these kinds of approaches in practice. Again, I don't want to imply that these trends represent an exhaustive mapping of the field, but I hope in tracing them briefly in this talk that I'll be able to convey a sense at least of the kind of work that is being done under the broad banner of the economic humanities. So let me give you a quick sense of what I want to cover. There are basically going to be 4 parts of the lecture. So firstly, I want to consider how the economic humanities draws attention to the crucial roles of mediation, representation, visualization, metaphor, in shaping how economic phenomena are understood, theorized, and practiced. Secondly, I'll consider how the economic world is pervaded by linguistic, textual, and symbolic forms that invite attention to the questions of genre, rhetoric, narrative, that are, of course, central to literary and cultural study. I also want to think about how a humanities-based analytical framework might help us to understand the animating roles of such seemingly irrational, unscientific states as fantasy, desire, faith, or imagination in economic thought and behaviour. And finally, I'll discuss how economic sociology's understanding of financial and economic theories and models as performative, that is, as producing or generating the very phenomena that they notionally merely identify or describe, how this idea of economics having a performative dimension, how placing this performativity paradigm into contact with an analysis of theatrical or dramatic performance as we would tend to think of it in an English department, how this juxtaposition might offer additional insights into the role of language, speech, and embodiment in economic life. So to begin then with those questions of mediation, representation, visualization, metaphor. Between 2014 and 2016, I was involved, along with Nikki, Peter, and others, in curating an exhibition, which Alex kindly mentioned, entitled Show Me the Money, the Image of Finance, 1700 to the Present. The exhibition was staged in various museums and galleries around the UK, and it consisted of myriad examples of the way in which financial markets, monetary instruments, and other aspects of the financial system have been represented in visual culture from the 18th century to the early 21st century. It encompassed a very diverse range of forms of visual culture, everything from ledger books and satirical prints of villainous speculators in 18th century London, right through to works of contemporary photography, video, and digital art. One work that we commissioned, especially with the support of the Arts Council for the exhibition, was a digital piece by the British artists Cornford and Cross, a piece called Black Narcissus. And this is a moving video piece. This is a still from it. This work is based on the stock prices from the FTSE index on the London Stock Exchange for the period 2003 to 2013. Using computer-generated imagery, it represents those prices as a mountain landscape, with the undulations, the peaks and troughs of the mountain range, corresponding to the ups and downs of the market. And right in the middle of the slide here, in this vertiginous drop, we have the global financial crisis of 2008. The market quite literally falls off a cliff at this point. One of the really interesting aspects of this work, I think, is the way in which it highlights how financial markets are habitually normalized and naturalized. Representations or visualizations like the stock chart with its undulating profile tend to give the markets the appearance of natural, necessary, inevitable things. And that's accentuated here by the way in which the stock market itself becomes a literal natural landscape. It gives the impression of something given, enduring, eternal, ontologically real in the fullest sense. But at the same time, I think, we're aware in viewing a work like this that this ultra-realistic representation is an artificial simulation. And this, I think, hints at how the markets are themselves, in fact, far from natural, but rather highly constructed, contingent phenomena, constructed, moreover, to particular ends and with particular assumptions built into them, and which could be constructed very differently. So a piece like this helps us to appreciate that far from being neutral or transparent, economic media and representational technologies like the stock chart, for example, play an integral role in constructing the ideological coordinates of economic knowledge and practice. Representation matters. Representation isn't just a kind of screen that we look through. It shapes our understanding of the very thing that it's notionally merely neutrally representing. Black Narcissus both deploys the common metaphorical conception of the financial markets as a mountain landscape, and at the same time, precisely by foregrounding that metaphor as metaphor, suggests how it might be denaturalized and rethought, and by extension how finance itself might be denaturalized, that is, no longer seen as a natural, immutable fact of life, but rather as a site of ideological and political struggle and contestation. And Peter and Nikki knew this was coming, I'm sure. It was very gratifying to my co-curators and I that when the editors of a major textbook, the Oxford Handbook of Financial Regulation, were looking for an image for their cover, they decided on a still from this work. And it's really pleasing to me, to us, I think, that the complex and critical meanings and implications of this work, however visible or not they immediately are, but nevertheless the kind of thinking that lies behind this work, that those are attached to this key reference work for scholars and professional practitioners in this field. That seems like a valuable thing to me. I want to shift emphasis now to focus on questions of genre, rhetoric, and narrative. And here I want to highlight the example of a project on which I collaborated both with Nikki and Peter, whom I've already mentioned several times, and with two economic historians, Helen Paul and James Taylor. Helen, a colleague of Nikki's at Southampton, and James at University of Lancaster. And this project resulted in a book that, again, Alex kindly mentioned, Invested: How 3 Centuries of Stock Market Advice Reshaped Our Money, Markets and Minds. What this project sought to do, as the title suggests, is to chart the history of a particular form of economic writing, the Guide to Stock Market Investment for the Non-Professional Investor. The kinds of books that are in fact ubiquitous today in, say, the airport bookshops where we might while away an absent-minded half hour whilst waiting for our flight. Books that promise to reveal to you a method, technique, or set of strategies for beating the stock market. And the book traces the history of this genre, and again, it's a history that we trace back to the 18th century. Now, when, on the rare occasions, economists have looked at the kinds of systems for stock market prediction propounded in books like this, they've quite reasonably and understandably been interested in one basic question: do they work? Will they actually, if you apply their methods, will they actually make you money? And what they've found is that there's very little evidence that any of the distinctive systems of investment analysis that are elaborated in these kinds of works would actually enable an investor to earn consistent returns in the stock market. At the root of our research, then, was an intriguing puzzle. If these kinds of books are highly unlikely to turn you into a star or even a moderately successful trader, then why are they such reliably prominent fixtures in bookstores, airport newsstands? And in many cases, such consistent sellers that titles first published the better part of a century ago continue to appear in updated editions today. One of the really interesting phenomena that we discovered was the investment classic, the book that was published so long ago that it would seem not possibly to have any relevance to an age of kind of high-frequency trading, but is nevertheless held up as this kind of almost Bible-like source of wisdom. In order to answer this question, we did the work of literary critics, which is to say we read, indeed, close read, by the end of the project, literally hundreds of these books. And the conclusion we came to is that they do, in fact, give readers something valuable, even if it's not what they ostensibly promise. While they notionally offer routes to market success, what they actually deliver are means of conjuring alternative and expanded forms of selfhood, narrative scenarios that provide opportunities for readers to conceive of themselves as resourceful, decisive risk-takers or possessors of privileged insights into the true nature of the forces shaping the markets. These are texts, then, that work towards the staging of fantasy and vicarious experience that permit readers to conceive of themselves as equipped to play a desirable, glamorous role, even in the absence of any actual means, ability, or even perhaps, in truth, intention to do so. That the avid consumption of such books stems from their capacity to make readers feel that they could achieve a desirable outcome, though the balance of probability belies that hope, places them in proximity to other popular lifestyle genres, like, for example, the diet book. And by interpolating the reader toward a profound transformation whose nature is subjective before it is economic, such texts' closest kinship might be to self-help literature rather than to economic theory, say. On our account, then, the economist's conclusion that investment advice writing does not work would only be the beginning of the story. While such texts may not work in a narrow economic sense, we aim to identify and understand the work that they nonetheless do, the cultural, symbolic, affective and ideological work of refashioning the self and naturalising the financialisation of both subjectivity and society. Similarly, we argue that approaching investment advice literature as simply consisting of a set of extractable and testable methods and precepts overlooks the particular rhetorical and narrative terms via which that financial content is articulated, along with the work that such rhetoric does in framing understandings of market norms and policing market boundaries. So by the time we finished the book arising from the project, we felt that we'd been able to demonstrate that the kind of attention to genre, rhetoric and narrative that is the stock in trade of literary criticism could offer a way of understanding the appeal and the success of a particular kind of economic writing that a strictly economic analysis concerned simply with the effectiveness or otherwise of this form of writing could not. So we would like to think that we were generating knowledge regarding an economic question that could only come from methodological coordinates that are precisely not those of economics. Some of the thinking behind this project carries over into the next area I want to discuss, which relates to questions of fantasy, desire, faith, and imagination. And here I want to highlight an aspect of a book I published in 2019 entitled The Market Logics of Contemporary Fiction. Now, as the title suggests, very differently to the Invested book, this is primarily a work of literary criticism and literary history, examining the contemporary novel. But here too, I tried at certain points to reverse this polarity and not simply analyse contemporary fiction from the point of view of the market, but also think about how contemporary fiction and an analytical approach to it might provide insights into financial markets themselves. And one of the things that I became especially interested in was a theory that is absolutely crucial and central to the discipline of financial economics. It emerged in the 1960s and 1970s, and it remains extremely influential, controversial and much contested, it should be said, but nevertheless extremely influential today. This is the idea of the efficient market hypothesis, the idea of market efficiency. My analysis of this theory, how it's conceptualized, the devotion that it commands among many economists and others, led me to see how it goes beyond the strictly theoretical, the strictly intellectual, and enters into something closer to the realm of faith, belief, devotion, the sacred, or even, I would suggest, the utopian. And in fact, I'd contend that finance more broadly has a profoundly utopian dimension. For many of those who work with or theorise about financial markets and instruments, such phenomena possess a beauty and perfectibility lacking from the world at large, but with the potential to make over that world in their own image. To this way of thinking, finance is, or at least tends towards being, an idealised domain in which absolute equilibrium, precision, and synchronisation preside. And all that is required for social and economic life in general to assume these same qualities is the thoroughgoing expansion of financial logics. Like all utopias, financial utopias are simultaneously technical, a matter of optimally constructed policies, practices, procedures, and deeply aesthetic, visionary projections whose sublimity is to be contemplated with reverence, awe, and wonder. And, as I've just suggested, finance's utopian aesthetic finds its purest expression, I think, in claims for financial markets' maximal efficiency. Now, the efficient market hypothesis, the EMH, is a central plank of the now canonical body of finance theory that began to transform American universities' economics and business departments in the 1960s and 70s, and became integral to financial professionals' models, practices, and assumptions over succeeding decades. It's most closely associated with the leading financial economists Eugene Farmer and Paul Samuelson. And the EMH refines a vision of the market as a perfect aggregator of dispersed knowledge and action that stretches back through pioneering neoliberal thinkers such as Friedrich Hayek, all the way to the foundations of modern political economy in Adam Smith and the notion of the invisible hand. In Eugene Farmer's canonical formulation, mature securities markets, financial markets, and advanced capitalist economies can be defined as efficient in that their prices always fully reflect all available information. Because, so the theory runs, numerous investors and traders devote their attention to identifying divergences between the prices of stocks and other financial assets and their true values, such divergences will vanish almost before they appear, as market participants immediately act en masse to exploit the arbitrage opportunity. So you get wind of the fact that there's important new information about the value of a stock. You see that relative to that information, it's mispriced. You trade in the market, and in doing so, you bring price and value into alignment instantaneously, is the kind of the theory. On this account, the market's collective wisdom has, as we like to say in English departments, always already priced in everything that can be known about the past and present, as well as everything that can be anticipated about the future. Since the efficient market consistently incorporates an aggregated best guess about what the future holds, impending price movements are in effect random, no more predictable than the successive coin tosses that, recorded on a chart, form the meandering random walk path invoked by Burton Malkiel in his celebrated popularisation of the EMH, A Random Walk Down Wall Street from 1973. This is a book that my co-authors and I discussed extensively in our stock market advice book, Invested. Now, underlying efficient market theorists' technical disquisitions is thus a conception of financial markets as, in effect, omniscient phenomena, in whose price records every event, even every merely prospective possible event, is weighed, registered and preserved. And what makes this conception properly utopian, in several senses of the word, I think, is the way in which it answers to a profoundly human and ultimately theological yearning for a transcendent realm in which the ephemera of the everyday would be redeemed and immortalised. Slavoj Žižek refers to such a space as the other scene, in which the accounts are properly kept, the fictional other place, in which, from the perspective of the Last Judgment, our acts will be properly located and accounted for. Thomas More's original utopia, we might recall, is literally a no place. Žižek is here echoing the Kabbalistic and Messianic utopianism of Walter Benjamin's theses on the philosophy of history, which imagines a divine chronicler for whom nothing that has ever happened should be regarded as lost for history, and whose recital of events, both major and minor, permits a redeemed mankind to receive the fullness of its past, now citable in all its moments. The EMH vision of financial markets would thus lend weight to Benjamin's intuition in the fragment Capitalism as Religion, written in 1921, that a religion may be discerned in capitalism, since capitalism serves essentially to allay the same anxieties, torments, and disturbances to which the so-called religions offered answers. The EMH suggests the possibility of something like the ascension of temporal life into the realm of the eternal that religious faith once uniquely extended. The utopian vision that glimmers within efficient market theory of the market as a radiant, redemptive space with the power to elevate even the most quotidian occurrences of our fallen world onto a transcendent plane helps to explain why the EMH retains such a hold across the discipline of economics and the financial profession, even in the face of events, most obviously the global financial crisis of 2007-08, that would seem conclusively to have disproved it. At stake is not simply a theoretical explanation of the functioning of the securities markets, but the very possibility of some secular proxy for the kind of omniscient state, traditionally attributed only to the divine, that might bestow meaning, significance and permanence on events and experiences otherwise destined to lapse into historical oblivion. This vision likewise helps to explain why the EMH has provided the underlying rationale for the neoliberal extension of market logics to virtually every domain of contemporary life, from health and education to criminal justice and even the environment. If markets know best, the argument runs, then all social and economic fields will function efficiently precisely to the extent to which they are organised on a market basis. Via this process of expansion, the utopia that is the market need not merely be an idealised reflection of the ordinary everyday world, with financial markets on the one hand reflecting wider socio-economic reality on the other, but immanent to that world, a fully achieved utopia at the level of daily life, whose every interaction would be miraculously coordinated and optimised. If, in the efficient market imagination, the social world is perfectly mirrored by the stock market, then the ultimate expansion and fulfilment of this vision would see the world, in effect, become coterminous with and indistinguishable from the market. So what I tried to do in this analysis of efficient market thought is to examine what might appear to be quite a technical, even dry, economic theory, and to try to understand the deeper philosophical, and as I've suggested, even theological vision that underlies it and helps to account for its enduring appeal. And in order to do so, I was again drawing on literary and cultural studies interpretive methodologies in ways that, I hope, illuminate an aspect of the economics discipline in a new and revealing way. The final area that I want to consider concerns two closely related terms that are increasingly important in social scientific approaches to the economy: performativity and performance. And here I'm drawing on a recently published book, Speculative Time, American Literature in an Age of Crisis, which came out earlier this year. Now, performativity, as many people in this room will know, is an important concept across the philosophy of language, cultural theory, especially gender theory, and in recent years it's become very significant in economic sociology as well. Key scholars in economic sociology and allied fields like the social studies of finance, most notably Donald Mackenzie of this parish, Professor of Sociology here at the University of Edinburgh. Figures like Mackenzie have argued that economic and financial models are not merely descriptive or merely predictive, but rather performative. That is, they produce or generate the very phenomena that they supposedly merely neutrally account for. So they're a version of what the pioneering American sociologist Robert K. Merton termed the self-fulfilling prophecy, the claim about the future that, by virtue of being made, helps to bring that future about. Recently, scholars in the field have increasingly argued that economic theories and other forms of economic discourse take on performative, that is, self-fulfilling effects, in part at least by deploying performative, that is, theatrical, dramatic, staged, spectacular techniques of delivery. For Ekaterina Svetlova, for example, economic performativity is rooted in the specific theatricality of language. It makes things happen by means of theatrical persuasion, convincing staging, and thus making believe. The trust taker stages trustworthiness using various devices and strategies, such as personal appearance and voice. By doing so, she does not provide the audience with any rational reasons for belief, but makes them believe. Despite the importance of such language for the economic performativity approach, however, there have been no previous attempts to put this approach into dialogue with the actual study of stage performance, of the kind carried out in literary studies and performance studies. I should say I'm not a performance studies scholar, however. A number of my colleagues in this room are, and I await their questions and comments, both with enthusiasm and apprehension. If, as an account such as Svetlova's suggests, what social scientists habitually term economic actors, this is the kind of terminology in the social scientific literature, if economic actors are to be understood in the performativity paradigm precisely as actors, in the theatrical sense, and if, moreover, such actors typically affect change, not simply by dutifully delivering codified formulas, but by conveying force and conviction via rhetorical and embodied methods, then the linguistic and performance techniques of a theatrical production in which the phenomenon of economic performativity is recognisably and centrally at stake present opportunities to isolate and examine, in magnified form, the performative theatrical dimensions of performative, self-verifying, self-generating discourse. And in my book, I argued that an American play, first staged in 1935, Archibald MacLeish's verse drama Panic, provides exactly such opportunities. It's a play set during the early 1930s banking crisis, in which there was a kind of wave of banking failures across the United States in the wake of the great crash of 1929, which very much had a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy aspect to it. Fear fed on fear, fed on fear. When FDR, in his inauguration speech, referred to having nothing to fear but fear itself, it was precisely this self-generating, self-perpetuating fear that was driving the banking crisis to which he was referring. And in this discussion of McLeish's play, I tried to show in detail how the notion of economic performativity deepens our understanding of Panic, a play in which the horizons of economic life are defined by a financial crisis that perpetuates itself because characters proclaim and act in the belief that it must, making it almost impossible to glimpse an alternate future. More broadly, I aim to offer indications not only of how social scientific theories of performativity might provide resources for the study of dramatic performances, whose themes, particularly in the American tradition, are so often financial or economic, but also of how direct attention to the theatre might enrich social scientists' accounts of the theatricality of financial and economic theory and practice. McLeish's playtext and the documentation of the 1935 production that can be found in a range of sources makes it possible to establish a clear understanding of how Panic was originally staged and performed. The play that emerges from this process of reconstruction presents itself as a strikingly pertinent dramatisation of the enactment and effects of economic performativity. And here I just want to focus on one particular key scene. Now, this is a scene in which a group of what are described in the play as radicals, left-wing agitators, confront a towering Wall Street financier named McGafferty. He's a kind of, very deliberately, a kind of J.P. Morgan figure. Interestingly, he was played in the original production in the 30s by a 19-year-old Orson Welles. The script has him as being in his 50s. Now, by all accounts, and this perhaps shouldn't surprise us, Welles was electrifying in this role and almost miraculous in his ability to inhabit a man of this age. I say it shouldn't surprise us because, of course, about 5 or 6 years later, he demonstrated those age-transcending abilities in his portrayal of Charles Foster Kane in Citizen Kane. But he was already demonstrating this earlier still. In this scene, a prophet figure who is named, it's an expressionist style play in this kind of expressionist manner. He's simply named in this kind of sense of him as a kind of archetypal figure. He's simply named the blind man. And the blind man seeks to inculcate despondency in a group of bankers so that, in performative fashion, their demoralisation will make the left-wing radicals' predictions of capitalism's decline into reality. Now, this photograph shows a 1980s revival of the play, and I'm pretty sure this is a shot of this particular scene taking place. I'll just read a few lines from this speech delivered by the character of the blind man, which will hopefully give you a flavour. It's a verse drama, of course, hence the very noticeable poetic quality to the lines here. The bursting seed of death is rotting right beneath your tongues. You doubt not in your heart, doom is your destiny. Not by the year's dearth or the earth's yield is man's fortune deciphered or fate told. Only in furrows of men's minds are sown the seeds that ripening are destiny. So this is prophecy precisely as a performative form of speech act, something that becomes true to the extent to which it is believed in, something that works on the minds and the bodies of those who receive it. It's a speech that I think points to the conclusion that all prophecy is, or rather aspires to be, self-fulfilling prophecy. The scene staging, moreover, suggests how the generation of such a performative response may derive not only from vivid and forceful rhetoric, but also from an address that, for all of its concerns might be of the broadest scope. It's about the collapse of capitalism. So for all that it's very broad, it has the effect of a personalised, intimate, passionate appeal. For the delivery of the lines above, McLeish's directions had the blind man extend his groping fingers to touch McCafferty's sleeve, rise, move on his shoulder, touch his face, and required him to modulate his tone so as eventually to speak gently, almost with tenderness, his voice low. In its accentuation of the encounter's intimacy and tactility, the scene is an exhibition performance of the roles of factors such as vocal dynamics and tonality and bodily posture, stance and gesture in performative utterance, understood as an attempt to elicit responses that are strongly affective and embodied in nature. So what I try to argue in my discussion of Panic is that the playtext and the practices and techniques of its original staging display a dynamic theatrical form that exhibits, enacts and interrogates economic processes now widely theorised under the rubric of the performativity thesis. The play is deliberately and instructively exaggerated. Again, it's an expressionist play. It has that kind of stylized quality. Deliberately exaggerated verbal, visual, bodily, and auditory elements combine to present a spectacular showcase of performativity in action. So this discussion is another attempt to show how literature and the literary critical, or I guess broadly performance studies, mode of analysis, might offer resources for deepening our understanding of economic theories and practices. To conclude very briefly, as I mentioned at the outset, I haven't sought here to provide anything like a comprehensive account of what this kind of approach, what I've outlined in terms of the economic humanities, does or might do. But I hope at least to have given you a sense of the variety and value of this diverse emerging field, and of the ways it draws on and at the same time reaches beyond the arts and humanities into economics and other branches of the social sciences. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you.